I was down in the river bottoms just chucking pigeons underneath the falcons, no big deal. There's a local vet, Tim Sullivan. He was tagging along that day, and bird stoops down, catches a pigeon and starting to pluck and eat on it. I'm like, I kind of got to give it a little bit of space, a little bit of time I can make in, but I need a few more minutes before I do it. Otherwise, she's going to pack it off. It's a female peregrine. And the bird squats down real flat and bolts with the bird, just about that quick. And here comes a male bald eagle, poop, 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 right overhead. Chase that falcon about a half a mile to 3/4 of a mile out. They turn 90 degrees. The eagle gets over the top of the bird, dives down, grabs the pigeon rather than the falcon. Unfortunately, the peregrine's foot is between the eagle's foot and the pigeon.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, for another episode of the Falconry Told podcast. Appreciate you all's continued support and for joining us again for another great episode. I'm sure you all will find this one pretty entertaining and we'll get some good stuff out of it. But before we get into it, I have to give a quick shout out to our sponsors of the podcast, being Baba Yaga Crafts out of Poland. If you haven't had a chance to check out or order any of his really nice handcrafted equipment yet, I highly recommend you do so. And if you haven't checked him out, just head to @BabaYagaGoshawk on Instagram, or you can get his contact information off of our website at falconrytold.com. Get you a nice set of anklets or hybrid jesses or whatever suits your fancy, but whatever it is, you won't be disappointed. It's all great stuff. I also want to give a quick shout out to the newest sponsor of the podcast, being Seth Roy of North Mountain Goshawks. And if you are soon to be in the market for a new goshawk, especially a parent rear goshawk, you should definitely hit him up. Head to northmountaingoshawks.com or send a Facebook message and get on their list for next year. He produces some great birds. I've seen some of them fly, and they're really high-quality game hawks. So if you're thinking about adding a North American, East Siberian, or Finnish goshawk to your hunting team, don't wait too long because his orders fill up quickly and you'll want to get on the list sooner rather than later. So hit him up and tell him we sent you, and think you'll be really happy with your new hunting partner. And speaking of goshawks and accipiters in general, I think you all will probably recognize the name of our guest for this episode of the Falconry Told podcast because of the books that he's written about imprinting accipiters, being Mike McDermott. And this episode has kind of been in the works for a while, and thanks to some mutual friends and some bourbon, he finally agreed to come on the podcast and talk shop a little bit about what inspired him to write the books and kind of what all went into it, some of the different experiences he's had, and of course share some of the stories that he's had in all the years that he's practiced falconry. So just an FYI, there's some colorful language in this episode, just be aware of that. So if you're offended by cursing at all and things of that nature, well, you've been warned. However, there's lots of really entertaining and informative stuff in this episode. I think you all will really enjoy it. I know I had a hell of a time catching up with a friend and spending an afternoon recording this with Mike, and it was a really good time. So, like I said, I hope you all enjoy it, and I now give you all Mike McDermott. Here we go. I mean, it's never too early for whiskey, though, dude. It's not. I mean, as they say, what's the saying?
It's 10 a.m.
5 o'clock somewhere.
It's 10 a.m. right now.
Well, I don't know. I've ever since high school, I've never really been a whiskey guy. I've always been more of a rum guy, and I think it's largely because rum is still to this day the only thing I haven't gotten sick on. But to each their own. I mean, I've got a lot of friends that love their bourbon and their
I never
whiskey.
tasted whiskey until I was 50 years old.
Really?
First time.
Well, what were you mainly drinking before that? Is beer or anything? Beer.
Yeah. Married guy stuff.
Fair enough. I don't know. Over the years for me too, I've kind of become more of a beer snob, and it doesn't help my palate or my wallet. I can't drink like the really commercial stuff anymore. I've become kind of a porter and a stout guy. I mean, what were you drinking beer wise before the whiskey?
Sam Adams mainly.
Yeah.
I'm real fond of their Oktoberfest.
Oh, me too. Yeah, and their I think their winter lager is really good too. But yeah, the Oktoberfest for sure I can do.
Leinenkugel's
Yeah,
another brand.
yeah, yeah. I can't do the normal Boston lager though. The normal Sam Adams Boston lager. Not a fan. Have you ever had it?
Yeah, I'm sure I have. It didn't strike me like big deal one way or another.
Yeah, it's not my thing. But anyway, yeah. I mean, everybody's got their own tastes, just like everything from beer to liquor to falconry. You know, everybody's got their own. I don't know. I guess things. They're whatever does it for them. I guess. But no, man, it's good to see you, and thank you again for allowing me to invade your life for half a day and catch up. I mean, it's been probably like at least 5 or 6 years or something since I've actually seen you in person. The last time I think I remember seeing you in person was whenever I came to see your Merlins fly. Whenever that was.
Oh, the one that was ringing starlings.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I missed that bird.
Yeah. It was your darker Merlin. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a dark one. Not technically a suclei. I'm doing air quotes right now. Not technically a suclei, but just a real dark columbaris. But it did ring starlings and it liked to take them up. Yeah.
Yeah. You had the 2 Merlins, and I think shortly after that you transferred the other Merlin off, if I remember right. But no, that was cool to see. I know there for a while, that's all you were really wanting to do was the Merlins and stuff.
Yeah, for probably 15 years or so.
Yeah.
That's all I did.
Yeah.
Went out to Bradshaw's place in Idaho or Washington. Spent a couple of weeks with him, trapped a bunch of Merlins, learned how, came back home and basically applied it. And started trapping Merlins here. The first winter, I think we caught 8 or 9 Merlins locally here in Missouri.
Been trying to make it back up to Jerris for a while. You know, I haven't seen him in person for a while either. But yeah, I mean, when I got to go out and see him trap and fly his Merlins, I've learned a lot.
It was Merlin school.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, and it's another bit of that falconry tuition that we pay, I guess, in a way. I mean, I've tried flying one Merlin myself, and it didn't end up being it didn't end very well. Let's just put it that way.
You don't have a lot of chance your first few times swinging a bat. I failed and failed and failed and failed. Literally went to Jeremy's for 2 weeks, came back and succeeded. That was what pushed me over the edge.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes that's what it takes, you know, and you can't keep spinning your wheels all the time. Doesn't really matter how experienced you are in certain aspects of all of this. Sometimes you still got to get that outside help.
That's one of the big things about Merlins that appealed to me so much is that it doesn't matter how skilled you are at this or that, or how many years of experience you have at this or that. With Merlins, you're starting over day 1, year 0.
Yeah.
And nothing you've learned before is really going to apply.
Yeah. Well, and I remember you telling me whenever I was over here that, I mean, you really wouldn't see an issue with someone starting off as a Merlin, with a Merlin as their first bird because it's such a niche individual type thing.
Yeah,
you know?
That's right. Yeah. There's a few caveats to that. You need to have a good prey base for Merlins, which 90% of the falconry population probably does have that. But here's the big kicker is you got to have a resource on hand that's close by that actually has experience catching game with Merlins and hunting with Merlins. And if you've seen it done, then you can apply it yourself and do it. But if you've never seen it, you're just going off books, videos, YouTube stuff, and I don't know. That's pretty tough. But if you got the human resource available, for a very first bird, you might as well, because there's nothing you're going to learn with your red tail that's going to apply to Merlins.
Yeah, and I do agree. I mean, you can apply that statement a lot too, I think, to a lot of species, but I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot of species where you can, I don't want to say get away, but I mean, you need more guidance with certain species than you do others, I think. And I would totally agree, especially with the smaller birds and like kestrels and merlins with the weight management aspect of things too, and figuring all that out. I mean, it can be a lot.
Yeah, weight management is almost a mindless, effortless task for me anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
You've been doing this a long time.
well, you fly birds for 40 years and you're going to pick up something.
Sure. Yeah, well, and as I like to apply to myself, the saying of every so often, the blind squirrel finds the nut, you know.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, the broken clock is right twice a day type of thing. Yeah, I refer to that to myself or apply that to myself quite often. But yeah, I mean, it's funny though, man, like how things have kind of evolved over the years, and it's still something that I would like to do more whenever I have the time and I think resources, because the one time I tried it, had to leave her out overnight, came back the next morning, and the only thing I found was the backpack, the transmitter, and and the transmitter antenna was extremely bent,
Right.
scratched up, so it was probably food for an owl or something throughout the night, unfortunately. But
No doubt.
But yeah, as you know, the Merlins kind of hit a little harder, sometimes whenever you lose them, I think. But
Well, it takes so much time and experience that you put into it to get a bird that's really achieving at high levels.
mm-hmm.
And then once you get that bird that's achieving at really high levels and there's a tragic ending, it just hits you in your heart and soul. It just destroys you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I know I felt that way with that Ias prairie that I had, that male. And, you spend 4 months, raising something, and then all of a sudden overnight it just dies or whatever. I mean, it takes a lot out of you for sure. But, what else have you been doing it's like I said, it's been a minute. I mean, what's the latest thing been for you?
Well, basically my right knee is decided to self-destruct. And I have been a few years since I've flown an accipiter. The last bird I flew was a chamber raised female Finnish. Fantastic bird. Cannot recommend them enough. And that kind of put the nail in the coffin as far as my knee goes. And that just pretty much destroyed me. Since then, I've just been flying long wings because it involves a whole lot less walking.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the long wing that I've seen, like especially like with those guys in Mexico and everything, though, there was some, there was definitely still some walking, but it wasn't the type of walking that I think you're used to with your quail and other stuff through lots of
when you're
heavy
hunting
terrain.
An accipiter, going behind bird dogs. I mean, it's a forced death march.
Yeah,
and miles and miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. When you're running bird dogs, half the time you can just stay in the car. The dog will run the field, go on point, unhood your bird, and go fly the point. And that's what I'm doing with partridge. That's an abbreviated version, of course. But that's what I'm doing with partridge right now in Iowa. And bird dogs and passage peregrines and Hungarian partridge. And it's all very, very good mix.
Nice. Well, and you've been retired for several years now, so it's like, those Iowa trips and things like that. Are you starting to do a lot more of the commuting falconry than you are even around here? Or?
Well, throughout my working career, I worked as an educator for 30 years. You're tied to your school, and vacations are few and far between. It just makes life tough and challenging. You have a golden rule that you basically got to follow if you plan to be successful in falconry. Fly the bird that matches the game that you have locally. Well, when you retire, it's like there's 2 times of freedom in a man's life. The first time of freedom happens when you turn 11 and you get your first bicycle. And your range increases and you feel the wind in your face, and you can go visit friends that live miles away. You can go to the river to go fishing. You can run up to the valley and shoot squirrels. You get that same sense of freedom again when you retire. You don't have a job that's tying you down. So rather than engaging in like a little bit of falconry each day, my wife and I will go to Iowa for 3 weeks at a pop and stay there and just fly at partridge and pheasant every day. Or we would go to Texas for 2 weeks at a time. or Kansas for 2 weeks at a time. We've never really made it a 4-week trip yet, but we've had a lot of 3-weekers, and that's been very rewarding, pleasant in and of itself. So around the house, we're just flying to the drone. It's not terribly thrilling, not terribly exciting, but does keep the birds fit. But all of our hunting is on long, extended trips like that. And when I say we go for 3 weeks at a pop, that's like each month. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, that's awesome that you've got the ability to do that now, and explore some of the stuff.
You will too. Make good choices, and you will too. Make bad choices, and you'll be working till you're old and crippled.
Yeah. Well, I always plan for the worst and try and keep the bar really low for myself. I mean, I hope so, but I just assume that I'm going to be working until I die. That's just the assumption I always go by. That way, later on in life, whenever it works out, I'll be that much, more surprised, I guess, and happier for it. But everybody's got their way of dealing with it. But
plan ahead
yeah.
and do the math. Yeah. It's like weight control on a bird, except it's your life.
Yeah. That's a different way of looking at it. Yeah, no, that's cool though. I mean, like I said, I'm happy that at least for you, it's worked out. And I mean, remind me though. I mean, like Leanne flies birds too, right?
Yeah,
and has for a while also, correct?
Yeah, she completely stopped when we had children, and until they were pretty much grown and out of the house and off to college, and then she started flying again.
Yeah,
and she's very, very fond of Merlins. She really likes her peregrine, and there we are.
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as where you're at, I mean, even if it wasn't the physical limitations you're starting to kind of deal with now in this junction of life for you, I mean, do you still prefer one thing over the other? Are you still mainly an accipiter guy, or have you kind of...
Well, I'll attack it from a slightly different angle. I like flying feather. That's really it. It's what you want to kill. What I want to kill is pretty much feathered. I've caught gobs and gobs of rabbits and quite a few squirrels. I was a little too old to be in the big squirrel generation within falconry, and I kind of attacked that later on down the road. But there for a long, long time, squirrel hawking was fairly taboo. This was prior to Gary Brewer's book, which sort of changed everything. But now I really like to fly feather. And if I wasn't flying feather with the long wing, I'd be flying feather with an accipiter. And I'm sure I will in the future too. I mean, I'm fairly certain of it.
Well, get that magic knee put in and
well, that's just a couple months away. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And all the bird has to do is make one bad fatal mistake around a bald eagle, and hello, Mr. Passage Cooper Hawk.
Yeah.
Good to see you again. It's been so long since we've last chatted.
Yeah. Well, and ironically enough, since, I mean, that's what we were both kind of trying to do also. Well, I mean, me trying, you actually, doing your thing. But yeah, I mean, the last time we were in the same place, same time, I mean, you had the Merlins, but then, you were also doing the passage coop that you had there. I think you molted the bird out, but you didn't end up flying it again the second season. You let it go.
I did get it going just a little bit, and we caught a few head the second season, but then I let her go, and she hung around for months and months and months and months. Not terribly shocking. I got a pigeon loft with free flying birds, but she hung around forever. Eventually one day she came in close enough that I was able to catch her. I got my hands around her legs. And picked her up, popped the hood on her, brought her in the house, put her on the scale. She sat there calmly like it was old hat. She weighed 700 and something grams. Jeez. I don't remember exactly what it was, but that was a bird that I hunted in the 500 gram range. 515, 520, something like that. But she was over 700 and came into a lure.
Wow.
After having been free for many, many months. And she started out as a passage bird.
Well, and I remember calling you and, asking some questions and things and here and there. And looking back on it, there's so many things that I can identify that I should have done differently. Of course, I ended up just fattening that bird up and letting it go. And, I just, like I said, I finally am just now kind of starting to think that I might have a better foundation, I guess, now to try and fly one again at some point. It's still going to probably be a bit before I try another passage coop, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, though, because there's, of course, just this continuing stigma around flying passage coops, and everybody's got their theories because, falconers, they love theories. But, I mean, do you do anything differently as far as just talking about passage coops now? Do you do anything differently that you have over the, since you started trying to fly them, or is there anything different with your approach?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Way back when I was very first getting going, I relied heavily on weight control. Still do, but I really lean on the birds back then. And what happened is you have a bird that's flying at artificially low weight, and it just doesn't have the muscle mass, and it doesn't have the confidence to tackle bigger quarry. Bigger quarry, specifically, is cottontails. Our cottontails are no bigger, no smaller than anybody else's. They're all pretty much the same, with a few exceptions, really tiny ones out west. But to get a passage Cooper hawk to catch rabbits is no big feat. Just don't crash its weight. Keep its weight up as high as you can. Have it under control. Instantaneous lure response. Not sloppy falconry, not sloppy loose falconry. Controlled, methodical, same weight, same time, day after day after day after day, and you'll have success with them.
And as far as, some of these birds that, there's, of course, the theories that everybody has too of, of course, some birds seem like they're going to be more suited, to falconry. And,
that's very true with passage coops. Mm-hmm. One of the places where the differences that you're describing really pop up a lot has to do with pursuing quail. You got a dog point, you flush a quail. Some birds will stand on your glove and not hesitate, not instantly launch off and attack the quail. They're like studying the quail, watching it fly away, and then all of a sudden it clicks in their head. Oh yeah, I'm here to catch quail. And then it'll chase the quail and put it in. Usually you can get it on a reflush the second or third time you'll catch that bird. Other Cooper hawks will instantly flash off the glove and bind to the quail in the air right in front of you. This is a passage bird, not imprint. Most all the imprints operate that way. But the passage birds, some do, some don't. I can't predict it. Yeah. That's just how they are. I generally look at a passage Cooper hawk as a easy to medium grade difficult bird. I look at the imprint Cooper hawk as definitely a difficult bird.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess it's really probably no different than a lot of species in that the only way you're going to be able to tell whether or not one is a good candidate is putting in the time, with the bird and kind of getting to the point where. Yeah,
you don't know till you're 3 weeks into it.
Right.
With most Merlins, you can tell the difference between individuals within just a few hours. Mm-hmm. But with Cooper hawks, it's weeks. It's measured in weeks. Mm-hmm. I've never ran into one that I thought just had to be released, that it was just an unacceptable bird. Now, the caveat on that is I don't even bother trapping them after November 1st. It's got to be caught September, October, or I just don't want it. Those birds are just too difficult in general, and they more or less never seem to work out. There's going to be some exceptions, of course, but 9 out of 10 times, fear is going to be the dominant emotion they experience all the time, and it's going to really get in the way of hunting. And unless that's the only bird you have and the only bird you have access to, you're pretty much beating your head with a brick.
Yeah. Well, and during that first 3 weeks, whenever you're working towards that instantaneous lure recall and all the rest of the manning process, are you showing it bagged game or anything anything through that time or anything?
No, the last 3 or 4 passage coops I had, I went straight from getting them to chase the lure, but they're frantically chasing the lure. Mm. Not passively coming, but frantically chasing the lure, and show them game, and they're on it.
And do you notice any difference at all between passage coops that are caught city versus country?
Boy, I I've got a pet theory about that. I have no proof. I kind of tend to think the city caught birds might be a little easier to work with, just because they have that exposure ahead of time.
Yeah.
I've got no proof, no evidence, no data, no statistics. Just
I don't think anybody does.
just a big question mark over my head. But that's kind of the way I'm leaning right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's been another one of those general theories, is that is kind of a little bit better to get one that's at least been kind of somewhat human exposed beforehand. But as you said, I mean, I've not flown.
Yeah, I don't have the data to back it up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I don't mind saying something like that as long as I throw that in there that
sure.
I can't back it up with jack shit.
Yeah. And that's totally fine. I mean, I don't think, like I said, this is all just theories anyway. And for whatever reason, people just struggle with passage coops, it seems like, more than any other species, and I, like I said, I don't know why.
Sometimes it's the person that makes the choice to fly a passage coop. Typically, if I'm just going to broadcast widely here, throw the net wide, it's going to be a family man working a full-time job, and this is his second or third bird after his red tail. And you're really just not suited for it until your kids are grown and gone, until your job is not such a struggle. When you can set yourself on autopilot, do a good job, feel good about the job you're doing, maybe that might be the right time.
Yeah.
But when you got to put a lot of thought and energy into your career, that's probably not the best time to take on a passage coops.
Well, and that's a big reason why I haven't again yet. And I will totally throw myself under the bus as being part of that, one of the things that's being caught in that net right now. I mean, I'm not afraid to admit it. I mean, it was a good learning experience though. The one or two times that I've tried, working with the passage coops, I ended up going ahead and just feeding them up and releasing them because I just, like I said, for whatever reason, I think I can think back and and recognize a lot of the mistakes I made, but I don't want to try it again until I know that I've got the time and consistency to apply to it.
Yeah, the commitment. It's, that has to be there. A lot of times the guys that succeed at passage coops that are trying them out, their first time swinging the bat, they're in their 60s. They're done working, they're done raising the family, and they may not be exceptionally gifted at falconry, but you know what? They got a superpower. Time. Time is their superpower. They can put in the time. They can keep the birds in the house. They can do whatever they need to do, and it works out for them quite readily. There's a local falconer, Kurt Nickmeyer. Great guy, good falconer, solid skills. His first time messing around with passage coop, total success. His first time messing around with passage merlins, total success. But he didn't come into it until he was older in life. And he has that superpower of time and commitment.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point because there's been a lot of times where I've mentioned, like, I don't know how a lot of these older guys, can get into it and be proficient at all coming into it so late just because of some of the physical rigors, that come with it. But, I mean, some of them have already had hip and knee replacements and everything, and they haven't even started their apprentice season yet. And you're just like, how are you going to, but
you remember, the last time you came out and visited, I was flying 2 Merlins.
Yeah.
Okay. That second Merlin wasn't mine. It happened to belong to Kurt Nickmeyer, the guy I just mentioned.
Oh, okay.
And on his very first hunt of the year, this is kind of a funny story. Well, not for him. On his very first hunt of the year, we're crossing underneath this commercial grade electric fence at a dairy farm. And as he was going underneath the fence, the top of his skull, he doesn't have any hair, the top of his skull hit the hot wire. He was out like a light, fell straight down, broke his leg with a spiral fracture.
Oh, no.
And snapped it in half. So meanwhile, his bird is out flying starlings. So I ended up retrieving that bird for him. we had an apprentice in the truck, and his leg is terribly broken, and we're heading to the hospital to drop him off at the emergency room. And there was a passage redtail on this tree that was really, really sweet, and the apprentice really wanted it. So he's like, "Oh yeah, go ahead and throw the trap out." So we threw the trap out to catch the bird. Kurt was fine with, but his wife she's never really looked at me the same way since. I don't think she was like real keen on that idea.
It's like, yeah, my husband is facing potential leg amputation over here, and
so we did get him to the ER, and the wife was she was like, "You can leave now.
You've done enough, sir."
But that bird, I was fine. That was his bird, and I ended up flying it the entire first season because he was laid up in a cast all that time.
Jeez, well. Some of the things we go through, man, you can't make this stuff up either. I mean, only fanatical idiots, I guess, would put a bird before a broken, freaking leg. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Actually,
he wasn't bleeding out. He did fine.
Well, I mean, does he still have the leg?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, then yeah, no harm, no foul. Then
he's been flying Merlins every year since then too.
Oh, that's great.
Every year.
That's great.
Does very, very well at it.
Yeah. Well, and one last thing I want to ask you about the whole passage coop thing before we kind of move on to the next thing is, I mean, how much time were you spending each day trying to man and work? What were you keeping the time sessions to, or were you?
You know what? I don't think I actually kept track of that.
Yeah.
Passage birds, they live with me in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm around them 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't really keep track of it.
Yeah.
Short version. Sorry, that's not very profound.
No, it's fine. Well, I mean, I know whenever I was consulting you about a couple questions about the one that I had, you were telling me to try to, keep some of the manning sessions, within, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes sometimes even like half hour, but make sure to do it before you feed and stuff, because as soon as you feed, then the bird doesn't really need to have you around, stuff
right.
like that or whatever. So
all the manning's up front before they get fed.
Yeah.
And stretch it out generally as long as you can, as long as you still have the bird's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as that hunger wanes and you start losing the bird's attention, pop the hood back on.
Yeah.
Put it back on the perch until it's back down to the right weight zone the following day.
Gotcha.
And then as the bird becomes more and more acclimated to you, less and less time out of the hood.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, that's great.
So the whole point of everything is to reduce stress. I will not let the cat destroy your stuff. Okay.
It's hilarious. Like you said, everything's a toy. That's funny. But no, that's great though, man. Like I said, I'm glad that glad that everybody still has their appendages around here, and everybody's still having a good time, flying the birds that you're kind of in this area. But well, I mean, as far as though, I mean, one other thing I wanted to ask you too, and we didn't even really brush on it, but you mentioned, flying, your chamber goss, your chamber finished goss that you had earlier. What are your thoughts now that you've had a chance to fly, chamber birds versus, the imprints and things? I mean, what do you personally prefer now?
If it's a European bird, I can't imagine flying anything but a chamber bird. It was literally the easiest goshawk I ever flew in my life. Mm. The breeder's going to be very upset with me for saying that. using the word easy with his birds, he would not like that at all. That's really is just the case.
Well, I mean, putting another little asterisk mark to that, though, I mean, you also have 40 years experience of dealing with them and things too. So,
well, I don't think it's so much that I make good decisions, but I didn't make bad ones.
Uh-huh. Gotcha.
That may be a fair way to describe it.
Gotcha.
American goshawks, I would never fly anything but an imprint. And if I lived someplace other than Missouri, I would almost certainly be involved in passage ones. Mm-hmm. If it's a European bird, I would want a chamber bird. They're just so easy, cooperative, manageable. No difference at all in their hunt drive. The bird that I had was a Finnish. I might have a different opinion if it was a Czech bird or a Spanish bird or a German bird. I don't know. I flew a German bird, probably 20 years ago. And it was a problem bird I was trying to correct for somebody else. I failed in that regard. I recommended the guy have the bird euthanized. It was hunting little kids on bicycles.
Oh, man.
And that was his preferred quarry.
Oh, no.
So, as I said, that bird was just beyond my abilities to remedy. Most of the time when I would get a problem bird from somebody else, I could sort through it fairly quickly and get it back to him in just a month or so. But that bird, I failed at.
Well, it sounds like pretty much anybody would have.
Well, I certainly had no shortage of game. I'll tell you that. And, I was giving it 20-something slips a day.
Jeez.
And they were like, mowed grass, industrial park, no-brainer slips that the bird should have just sucked up. And it went for the little kid on the bicycle every time.
Jeez. Yeah, we don't want that. Definitely don't want that. But, well, I mean, like I said, I was just curious because I didn't know if you'd even, have you tried any of the hybridized, goshawks with whether it's a North American, European hybrid or any of the European
I
ones?
don't have any experience with those. I've seen the American Finnish birds flown. They seem fine. Like a bigger, larger American bird is kind of what they look like. Very, very attractive birds. But I haven't flown one myself. I've just seen other people hunt them and they did fine.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a few of them flown too. And I think that, I've never flown a goss yet. But I have seen a metric ton of them flown so far with a lot of our mutual friends that we both know, of course. But,
well, for your first go around, I would certainly encourage you to get a chamber European bird. And I'm a big fan of Lance Christensen's birds, not just because that's the bird that I flew, but I've seen a lot of other people fly his, and the way he raises them is very, very unique. And takes a lot of time. He charges about $1,000 more than everybody else too.
Well,
but if you've been there and you've seen his setup and you've seen the sorts of things that he does with these birds, you can see why.
Well, and it's understandably so too, because you've got to house a bird for that much longer. If you're a chamber raised bird, it's that much more food, and like you said, you can't put like a monetary value on time sometimes. Also,
yeah, well, time and expertise.
Yeah, sure.
Basically, what he has is he has a bank of camera screens. There must have been 30 different screens he was looking at. He has multiple cameras in every chamber, so he's able to look at all the different groups of birds that are interacting together. So in one chamber, at one age, he'll have both parents with chicks in the nest. The parents are doing all the feeding, all the raising, all like that. And then when one of the offspring gets to get a little bit too frisky with dad, they'll attack dad, the smaller of the two. Then he pushes dad into a new chamber. And then dad is safe. And he does this through these levers and pulleys and sliding doors and all this sleight of hand stuff that does not involve a dip net. So the bird goes off into a different chamber. And then when the level of aggression rises to where they chase the mother off as well, both the young birds start attacking then they get rid of mom and they bring in other immature birds of the same sex. So then you got a cluster of female Finnish goshawks that are all together. One of them is going to become the alpha. Whenever the alpha gets too big for her britches and starts totally dominating all the other birds, that alpha gets put into another chamber with other alpha birds. So they're in this constant state of flux where the big kid on the block gets knocked off his soapbox, and they're constantly jockeying for top dog.
Yes, and so one doesn't always have the time to really assert that level of dominance and attitude, I guess.
And it basically Tom Colson, good God, decades ago, they did something not terribly different with Harris Hawks, and they created, a great line of hunting birds that way. What they learned in that chamber is invaluable. And for Lance, the number is about $1,000 more. The amount of food they're eating is probably only about $100 worth of food. But knowing when to jockey what bird into what chamber, that's priceless.
Yeah, it's kind of like the thing that you see floating around where the dude comes in, repairs the boat, and then spends about 10 minutes and charges, however many thousands of dollars or whatever to move one pin here or whatever in this engine. And they're like, oh, you only did 10 minutes worth of work, but it's
a lifetime of experience to know
exactly
what to do, right?
What to hit where and tap where. And I have gotten a chance to see a handful of breeding projects now, not just in the US, but also going to Falcon Mews in the UK and seeing how a lot of these guys.
Yeah, I went in Hillary Gilbert's place and I got a nice tour there.
Yeah. And seeing how all these guys do this different stuff. And I don't know how these guys do it. As far as just, the amount of time, effort and energy that goes into some of these breeding projects, it's amazing.
Oh, I appreciate it. It's not for me. It's not how I want to spend my time.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the hell out of these other guys doing it. And I don't mind paying them for their efforts.
Yeah. Well, it's the same with equipment makers and anything else. I don't mind paying a couple $100 for a really nice hood from someone that's been doing it for as long as some of these guys have and been able to avoid burnout. But yeah, no, that's cool though, man. I'll take that into consideration. I came real close. I almost ended up with the goshawk a couple of seasons ago, and my septic system decided, as I've said before, that wouldn't be a very good idea. So anyway, maybe someday, I don't know, we'll see. But that's cool. I mean, I want to real quick though before we go into anything else. I don't know if you have really mentioned it a lot before, or I know that you haven't as far as this type of format, but before we go any further, I would like to find out more about how you got into falconry, all those years ago, and kind of what, I don't know, sparked your interest, and, just kind of discuss that for a little bit before we move on to the next thing.
Okay. It's pretty unremarkable. Kind of grew up a farm boy, on a farm that really wasn't farmed. My dad stopped the family tradition. He went to work for the telephone company. So I surrounded by cornfields and just grew up shooting shit as a kid. That's what farm boys do. Mm-hmm. So lots and lots of hunting. So I was a hunter for years and years and years before I ever became involved in falconry. And there was a lot of hawks that would land in the trees around us, where we lived, because we're in basically a floodplain, and there aren't trees everywhere, but there happen to be trees in our yard. There was a white-faced red-tailed hawk that hunted from that tall, lofty perch in our yard a lot, and that sort of sparked an interest in raptors. Years later, I had an art exhibit at a bank. Most of the stuff that I'd painted was birds of prey and falcons and eagles and whatnot like that. And a falconer contacted me. He didn't buy in my art, but he lit an addiction in my soul. A year later, I was flying a bird and have ever since.
That's nuts. Yeah, and it really has really shocked me. I guess I shouldn't be surprised because falconry is such an art, to so many people. But it really has amazed me, the more people that I talk to, how many people are artists, that are also falconers, musicians, that artsy side
There's
of the brain.
There's a lot of hurt people that are falconers too.
Yeah.
Snake handlers and lizards and stuff like that. That's a very common thing as well.
Sure, and a lot of them are artists as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I guess it's just because it's that same side of the brain that kind of helps us operate to whatever degree. I don't know. That's another one of those things where I don't have any evidence of. It's just or a proof, however you want to put it. But it's just something I've noticed, and I've talked to a lot of people now, and it really is just amazing how many people have this extra artistic bone in their body other than just
it's kind of
bird.
a balance between science and art.
Mm-hmm.
You have your science component where you analyze a problem, you come up with a hypothesis, you apply it, you test your results, and if it works, you continue it. If it does not work, you abandon that and you go for a new hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
The art is your ability to interpret subtle behavioral communications from your bird. It's your ability to interpret things.
Mm-hmm.
It's your sensitivity to what you're feeling the bird is experiencing, what the bird is learning. That's kind of how I've always looked at it.
Yeah.
It's a balance of science and art. You do it all the way one way without the other, you're not going to succeed very much. You're not going to get past basic birds.
Right. Because if you don't learn the subtle nuances of how to read a bird one way and you just go by numbers and everything else, then you got to have both. Yeah, you got to have both for sure. Well, that's cool. Well, I mean, I don't consider anybody's journey into this unremarkable by any stretch, but I mean, I think it's cool though that, I mean, I always like talking to other guys too that did have some degree of like hunting history, before getting into this, because I didn't have any. I mean, I didn't have a hunting background or anything before I got into this. And so, like I said, I always like finding out how people get into this, because everybody's path, even though there's a lot of similarities, there's always subtle differences. So that's cool though. I mean, if you grew up that way and just kind of fell into it, so be it.
Yeah, I did. I just fell into it. There's no better way to describe it.
I did too. I think a lot of guys do, but no, that's awesome though, man. Like I said, I wanted to at least get that covered before we switched to, one of the main things though that I did want to really kind of go into depth some during this conversation though, which was, I mean, you're an author as well. You've written a few books now, and I mean, out of curiosity, what inspired you to want to write some of these books? I mean, I always admire people that want to take on that endeavor too, because it's a big undertaking.
It's not an answer you like.
I have a feeling I already know the answer to a degree.
Okay.
Because it's the same reason that other people that I know have written books also.
Okay.
But go for it, man.
Okay. The first book was The Imprint
Mm-hmm.
I wrote it in the mid to late 90s. I'd already trained quite a number of goshawks and Cooper hawks, at least one sharpshin by that time. They were all more or less exemplary birds. They all... This is the worst way to describe it, but it's the most clinical way I can say it. The Cooper hawks were typically killing in the 400 head a season range. The goshawks were in the mid 200s. My best ever with an immature goshawk was 270. My best year flying two birds combined was like 686 head. So I'm just using numbers. That describes one very narrow, in fact, shallow part of their success as falconry birds. But it's the only way I could describe it quickly enough within the format. Mm. Is that a good enough excuse?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd had a lot of success. Used to attend all the NAFA meets year after year after year. Would never turn anyone down. There were times when we had 50 and 60 people in the field at one time, and the bird is flying from the top of someone's head to the top of someone's head to the top of someone's head and catching multiple head of game in front of crowds like this. So what happened is I received an awful lot of attention. And before you think, oh, that's wonderful, such an ego, there's a cost. And that cost is your phone never stops ringing day and night, week after week, month after month. It was incessant. I changed my number 12 times. I begged my friends never, ever give out my number, but they always did. Kind of makes me question how good of a friend they were. So basically, people are just driving us crazy, because it's not just me, it's my wife, and I got a young child at the same time. And it was a very trying and difficult time. Hey, don't get me wrong. I want to help people, but I need to sleep too. And I would unplug the phone in order to sleep at night, because literally you'd hang up with one and there'd all be somebody, the phone would be ringing with somebody else already on it. It was just nearly impossible to deal with. So I started writing the book sort of as a result of traveling around and doing lectures here, there, wherever. The bottom line was that when I was in England, I was given these like 4-hour-long super marathon lectures. And it was a lot of information to lay out on any human being verbally. It was a lot to start from absolute zero. Okay, these are asocial creatures. They don't love you. Don't think they do. They don't. Start with that and end up talking about more sophisticated, advanced aspects of your relationship with your bird. So the book came out of all that. And then that book was quite an ordeal in our married life as well, in that I went to a couple of publishers of Falconry books, and they said, oh yeah, we've heard of you, good game hawker, saw you talk in Texas, this sort of thing. But what you're writing about, it's just a little too controversial. We just don't really want to go there. Of course, now it's the status quo. It's not controversy at all. But at the time, it was quite controversial.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, publishers were eager to publish the book, but they wanted editorial control over it. And they were going to take out the heart and soul of what actually makes it work, which is a balance of a whole bunch of different facets. And then it would have failed. It would have failed. There was one group of individuals that was all behind me 100%. And that was credit card companies. They couldn't wait to have me sign up for another credit card. So I took out 12 credit cards and charged, gosh, how much was that? $23,000 in one day on a variety of credit cards. It was enormously high risk on my part, but at this point, I felt like I had to get it out there because I wanted to help people. I hope that I would be able to break even. We lived in a rental trailer at the time, and I had a very young infant boy, Nicholas, and it was just an enormous financial risk. But like, what are they going to do? Take my truck that breaks down every half mile? What can they get from me?
Yeah.
So anyhow, ended up breaking even completely within 6 months. Ended up making a few bucks on the opposite end, but that was never the goal or the purpose. The goal and the purpose was really just to help people out and maybe ease up my phone time, ease back on that.
Yeah, my suspicion was correct.
Okay.
No, well, and of course, we already kind of know each other a little bit. I know enough from, you and then other guys that, have written books and stuff too, that usually is the main purpose. Rather than field 100 billion phone calls, messages, whatever the case. It's just,
I know that's the most shallow reason I could possibly come up with, but that's the God's honest truth.
Well, you know what though? It's reality, and I wouldn't want my phone ringing 100 billion times a day either. Why not just go ahead and compile everything that you would tell somebody on the phone, if not more?
Oh, that's exactly what it was.
And put it out there, and then hope that you stop fielding, 100 or so in a day and just go down to about
occasionally I get a phone call now from someone that's interested in writing a falconry book. And I generally always start the same way. Make sure you have something to say. Don't write a book, just write a book because you want to write a book. Write a book when you got something to say. Theoretically, something new. Even if your book is about history, if you've discovered some new historical fact or angle, write about that. Mm-hmm. That's worth reading. Regurgitating the same old stuff every time, probably not worth reading, and you're probably going to have pretty limited success on it.
Sure.
The last guy that I really strong-armed into writing a book was Jeremy Bradshaw.
Yeah.
The Passage Merlin.
Yeah.
I literally twisted his arm behind his back to get him to do that.
Well, it worked.
Yeah, and I'm very happy with this product.
Yeah.
I'm real happy with it.
It's a great book. Yeah. No, that's fantastic though. I mean, honestly though, on the surface, I know to you that might seem like a shallow reason though, but I mean, that would be as good of a reason as any for me to have motivation to do much. I mean, if there's a demand, I mean, and plus, I mean, it was a good gauge probably for you to be able to somewhat at least predict some degree of demand for it, because if you're getting all these billions of phone calls and stuff, I mean, at least some of those people are going to want to buy, a book and stuff. So.
I didn't think of that at the time. I basically thought about $22,000 on credit cards.
Well, I can relate to that. I will tell you a story after we get done recording, but I can relate to that, and it's not fun. It's not a fun thing to worry about, and I admire that though. Someone that's willing to take a chance to get something out, not only to help people out, but just to do something, about whatever situation they're in. I mean, that's not everybody's got the guts to do that. So.
Well, when you're facing total financial ruin, guess what? That's not ruin.
Yeah.
That doesn't, they're not going to cut off your leg.
Yeah.
They're not going to repossess an organ.
Yeah.
It's just financial ruin. Mm-hmm. And frankly, at the time, I had very little to lose. Mm-hmm. I had a busted ass pickup truck that was next to worthless. My wife, I think Nick was born then, or he was a bun in the oven at the time. I can't really recall. It's been some time. But no, financial ruin, if you don't have a lot to lose, isn't as bad as it sounds.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. It was real pressure. It was real pressure.
Yeah. I can imagine. Like I said, I can relate somewhat to that for sure. I have had a similar type of situation, and it's not fun having to stare in the eye, like trying to figure out how you're going to make the payments, and not only that, but like you said, just avoid that complete financial ruin because you took a risk. And,
it was a risk.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, I mean, luckily it paid off though, and I mean.
Well, the big payoff on that particular book wasn't finance. The big payoff with that book was just helping people all over the world.
Sure. And it really is an all over the world thing. Because, I mean, having been to a few different countries now, everybody talks about, for lack of better terminology, a lot of people refer to it as like the modern recipe, and whether or not that's a good word to use or not, I mean, it is what it is. But that is the next topic of conversation that I want to talk about though, because I mean, it has been some time since you've written the book, and I am curious. I mean, nothing else for myself, but I know a lot of other people probably are curious too, as to having written the book, and it has been some time since you've written it, and you've had a lot of birds and a lot of falconry since then. What, if anything, is there a difference in mindset on as far as things that you've written now, as opposed to or things that you've written before as opposed to what you do now? I mean, is there any difference in mindset that you have from what you've written previously?
Well, I haven't written any additional books because I really haven't had any additional original ideas. Mm-hmm. I don't have anything to say. The biggest difference I would like, if I could go back and correct something,
Mm-hmm.
it would be poo-pooing all chamber birds.
Mm.
Back about, say, in the early 2000s, people were starting to put together chamber bird systems. And it was early. It was crude. It was basically throw a bunch of birds in a shed and see what comes out the other end. And largely, it was crap. It was birds that refused slips, that didn't like to hunt, that had hang-ups with all sorts of terrible fears. So that's what I wrote about in the imprint books. That was the state of the art at the time. Today, they have a lot more sophisticated management techniques for handling these birds. And the chamber bird of today is nothing like the chamber bird of 30 years ago. They're just apples and oranges in a completely unfair comparison. So that would be one regret I have. But of course, I can't really look forward in time and write about what hasn't happened yet.
Well, I mean, that is the beautiful thing about a format, say like a podcast, for example, though, where you're able to actually sit and discuss. And not to say that this conversation is going to be Imprint Excipitor 3 or anything, but I mean, I wanted to at least discuss this some because I know if it was me, and of course I've not written a book, but if it was me and I had hypothetically put a written work out there, I know for a fact that there would probably be some things that I would be doing different 30 years, 20 years later,
Sure.
From what I wrote in a book. So, I mean, I wanted to talk for a little bit about it and ask about some of this stuff because I figured surely there was probably at least something,
Well, I'm not the same man I was, in the late 90s,
Mhm.
On many different levels.
Sure.
The last goshawk I flew was that chamber-raised Finnish bird.
Mhm.
It was one of the best goshawks I'd ever flown in my life. This bird was designed for long, distant pursuits. It had dozens of flights on pheasants that went over a mile. And it wasn't flap, flap, glide, follow behind till it puts in, and then pound on it, on the ground like a red tail would. It was high-speed wing flapping, 69 miles per hour GPS measured, balls to the wall, all-out chase.
Mhm.
Very impressive example of physicality, athleticism just through the roof. A very, very impressive bird. My first season, I didn't break triple digits. I was either in the 80s or 90s. I really can't recall which right now. Most of what I caught was feather. So I was doing high fluting stuff, waterfowl, pheasant, quail, wild chucker in the mountains of Nevada. Very, very impressive stuff. That last American bird I flew, it caught 270 head its first year. They were largely cottontails. There was some quail mixed in. There was some waterfowl mixed in, but it wasn't nearly as impressive a bird as that fin bird was on long pursuits. Did a lot of studies with GPS since that thing has come out, just on my own. And the fin bird would hardly ever break 40 miles an hour. In fact, the magic number seemed to be 38 time after time after time after time when it was flying at rabbits. And it didn't matter if it was cottontails or jackrabbits out west, 38 miles an hour. That was how fast it flew. Pheasants, 69 miles an hour. Never broke 70, but I had a couple of times, 3 times maybe, where it got up to 69 miles an hour. And it was kind of interesting in the way that it worked at speed. It would start off on the glove, of course, and build up as quickly as it could. By the time it got to about 300 yards, it was at its top speed. But it took 300 yards for a 1,200 gram goshawk to get up to speed. And it would maintain that speed for a couple hundred yards, and then it would actually decrease its speed until right before the pheasant would flare its wings and drop straight down. And then it would have another burst of speed where it'd pick up another 15 to 20 miles an hour of additional speed at the end. And this is like hard pump and wing flap and zero gliding going on. This is like the bird that was really, really fit, giving it all it had. But that was its strategy. time after time after time after time, build up slow to 300, max out for a couple hundred more yards, then it would decrease its speed until the put in, and then there was a big push at the end. And that was very interesting stuff. Flying that same Passage Cooper hawk that we had talked about earlier on cottontails, it caught 40-something rabbits that first year, and it was never go more than the mid-40s, but it would go 40, 45 miles an hour on most cottontail flights. Fly the same exact field with a goshawk, 36, 38 miles an hour. Just time after time after time after time.
Well, I'm sure the flights only lasted like seconds too. I mean, they probably didn't last very long either, did they?
Well, it was a lot like flying jackrabbits with a goshawk.
Yeah.
There was a lot of buck and bronco ride sort of affair. A lot of them would break loose. The Cooper hawk would jump up, fly it down, suck it up again, and we're back at the fights. Basically, it just had to hang on to it until I could get there.
Sure.
Which is exactly what it was like flying American goshawks at jackrabbits,
Yep.
They weren't killing them. They were just catching them and hold on till you get there. The finished bird, it killed jacks. You would get there and it'd be dead. But, of course, there's a big size difference between the two creatures.
Of course. Well, that's very interesting to hear. And like I said, that's one of the big reasons why I wanted to have this discussion was, for that very reason. I wanted to talk some about this and also ask you a couple questions too, because I know we know, of course, a lot of mutual people, and a lot of those guys do love flying goshawks and stuff. And the one of the main things I wanted to ask you about was mainly revolving around something that you already brushed on briefly, which was the topic of fear, in these birds, especially with these imprint birds and things like that. There's a lot of guys that are perfectly fine with taking a little bit older eyases in the nest, that are kind of past what you would ideally describe in the book, as that fear stage. They've already kind of are able to, have fear and things like that, and do have fear. There's a lot of guys that think that they tame down pretty easy and make good falconry birds and stuff later, and don't necessarily completely subscribe to the whole you have to get a bird or an eyas before that that fear stage and stuff.
Well, it depends on what you want as an outcome. Mm-hmm. Earlier I mentioned I was a different person now than I was 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I only talked about where I was now.
Sure.
I talked about my European goshawk that I really loved a lot, and she flew really, really hard and all that. Mm-hmm. I didn't talk about how I was as a younger man. And then it was all about stacking up dead bodies.
Yeah.
I wanted to soar back by the end of the day because I had corpses in the back of my game vest.
Yeah.
I wanted lots of that. And the best way to get that is with an imprint. Mm-hmm. There's just no debate, no discussion. Someone might raise a finger and say, well, and I'm like, bullshit. I don't fucking care what you got to say. There's no way anything is going to compare to an imprint for stacking up dead bodies. Mm. Now, is it going to be easy to make a bird that is good-mannered like that? No, it's going to be very technical to make a bird that's good-mannered that catches game like that. But at that age, that's what I wanted. And I can look around and see a lot of the younger falconers, and they got that, kill thing going on too. And by and large, I try to encourage it, by and large. But there's like little subtle things that, I kind of, at this stage of my life, I want the total package. I want the bird that flies its balls off. I want a bird that just flies. And I'm a little bit less concerned about stacking up the dead bodies,
Sure.
I know it sounds like they're in opposition to one another, but not really. One of the very last goshawk I flew, never mantled, never carried. You know how easy it would be for a 1,200 gram bird to fly off with a friggin' bobwhite quail?
Very easily.
Yeah. effortless would be the word.
Yeah.
Effortless. No, a bird that never carries and all like that. There's a lot of math involved with weight control and things like that, but there's also trust that's involved.
Yeah. No, like I said, I just was curious because, I've been able to see, as I said before, I've been able to see a lot of goshawks flown now. And part of that is also knowing how they were raised or, everything before that. And, I've seen goshawks, North Americans that were taken, almost, and not like brancher stage, but pretty old, in the nest. Seen some taken as, full downy chicks, of course, and things like that. And, you're still able to, in a lot of those cases, tame down and have still a really nice goshawk either way. But I didn't know, like I said, if there was any difference but that pretty much answers my question, as far as to, just kind of, it's more of a mindset, type of thing as far as.
Well, it depends on what you want.
Yeah. Right.
I want to have a good experience camping and catching stuff with my bird, and I want to have really high quality flights with my bird now.
Mm-hmm.
The 25-year-old Mike, I just wanted dead shit in my vest.
Yeah.
I wanted to I just wanted to fill the freezer, so to speak.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is with a straight imprint. If you're taking older birds, every once in a while, someone is going to have a really successful experience like that. Most of the time, they're going to fail. Most people are going to fail at that. And that's one of the things about riding is you're not riding to the exceptional falconer that wants to try something a little risque and experiment and explore a new area. Mm-hmm. You're riding to the exact opposite person.
Yeah.
You're riding to the bottom of the barrel, lowest common denominator, Neanderthal motherfucker walking the face of the earth. That's who you're riding to. You're riding to the kid that ate the crayons. Okay. The glue eater. That's who you're riding to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you ride exclusively to the elite guy, he's going to understand it anyhow.
Sure.
But you're going to lose everybody else along the way.
Sure. No, I get it. And no, it makes total sense. And I understand that like I said, I understand the mindset, as far as, you just want to make it as foolproof, as you can for,
That's a good word to use as any.
Yeah.
Whenever you're writing a how-to type manuscript, you got to write to the lowest common denominator, and it has to be made as simple and as small bites as possible.
Makes total sense.
And anytime you vary out of that, you're really not writing to the common man anymore. You're writing to the elite gifted person.
Yeah. In which case, a lot of times those people don't necessarily need a how-to book.
They don't need it at all.
Right, exactly. So
no, they don't.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, and sticking the same note or same kind of vein of conversation before we move on though. Is there anything else though that you can think of or is it still kind of, for the most part, is it still, there's nothing really you would really change at all or, make addendums to or anything?
I think most of the stuff that I had put forth back then is still relevant today. I think there's probably going to be some changes in falconry in the near future. I think the future improvements on the game catching end it's going to be through hack, some form of hack. I think we as a group have pretty much explored the age you take the bird from right out of the egg all the way through a passage bird. I think that's pretty much been pretty thoroughly explored. What has not been thoroughly explored, at least in the United States, is hack. When I was in Spain, they've been hacking birds for hundreds of years, for 4 and 5 generations of falconers in the same family. They really got it going on there. And I think in the U.S., when accipiters begin to evolve and we begin to see new revelations and new techniques, I bet it's going to be through hack, some form of hack. Might not be a wild hack, might be a tame hack. Don't really know. That's the future. That's unknown. But the bet money says it's going to be right there in that realm.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. I mean, it's briefly mentioned in a lot of books, kind of like your writings, or even just by word of mouth. I mean, there's a lot of guys.
My hack experience is just baby level.
Yeah.
I've hacked a handful of birds out. I've seen a few other people have hacked birds out in very urban environments, and they get a very different bird than one that's hacked out in the country.
I bet.
One of the biggest criteria that determines the type of experience the bird has is meadowlarks. If these accipiters are hacked out in field that has lots of meadowlarks in it, they spend most of their time chasing these birds, putting them in, and they escape because there's no dog there to point it. There's no human there to reflush it. They're going to fly it hard. And meadowlarks have that starling type of wing beat to them that really excites the accipiters. They chase them hard, they build muscle, they put them in, and they do it again and again and again all day long. At the end of hack, you get a bird with rock hard breast muscles on it where you're really not reducing its weight at all to go hunting. It's been hunting. It's ready right now. The guys that are hacking birds in cities, they don't have that at all. They end up with a bird that has medium breast muscle put on its keel. And that's because they're just flying around. The worst thing that can happen is they figure out what bird feeders are. And they start making rushes at bird feeders and splattering birds into picture windows. And then they hop down on the ground and eat them there. That's probably one of the worst things that can occur. But the difference between rural and urban hacks is pretty profound in the results that you get. But that's the one species that determines the big difference. It's not jackrabbits. It's not quail. It's meadowlarks.
I would have never thought of that either. But yeah, I mean, as far as the urban stuff, I mean, the starlings and sparrows and parks and backyards and things like that, it would make sense that, those birds that are hacked in urban environments probably wouldn't. I mean, you're talking about super short, ultra ambush type stuff.
Reno, Nevada probably has more California valley quail than sparrows. Certainly it has more valley quail than pigeons or any other songbird that you'd want to throw a stick at. There's just thousands and thousands and thousands of valley quail that are walking through housing projects and through subdivisions and through backyards nonstop all day long. And the birds hacked in that environment don't seem to be particularly keen on chasing quail. Meadowlarks seem to be what produces the best birds.
It's interesting.
I don't have an answer for every question.
That's
one of those I don't have an answer for. You'd think, quail would be even more exciting than chasing a meadowlark, but I don't know.
I mean, I guess maybe not if they're able just to walk around and just walk undercover all the time or whatever the case is.
Well,
who knows?
Maybe that's it. Maybe they don't do long extended pursuits like they do with larks. That's a theory. I don't think it's an answer, but it's a good a theory as any.
Well, and that's another we'll just add to the long list of falconer theories then.
We don't know.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, and as far as I know, you have thought about doing some other projects and things. I mean, I know I've also gotten some advice from you before with Sharpies and things like that too, but I don't know. Like what I did talk to you about once, and what I do admire is that you don't like writing about certain things unless you feel like you've flown all the different types of species, subspecies, everything else. Is there anything left that you think that you would like to fly or potentially put together another written work for or anything? Or
not so much in falconry. I've been working on a fiction novel. It's been a lot of fun. just make shit up as you go along.
Right.
It's fun.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't involve facts or statistics or anything like that. But whenever you're talking about falconry, if you're putting an idea out there, well, it better be tested forward, backwards, and inside out.
Mm-hmm.
You better know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get slapped, in your place really quickly.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of really, really intelligent people involved in this sport.
I'm glad that you have been able to, if nothing else, find another avenue, I guess, of just pure fun as far as writing and things like that, though. And, I really do want to read that whenever you're, getting ready to publish or have published. And I think that'll be pretty fun to read. Like I said, I was telling you, I've got a couple other friends that have been able to have some of their sci-fi fantasy novels and things like that published. And it was cool being able to, it's cool whenever you get a chance to read novels like that from people that also, just because, kind of like you were saying, whenever you're chuckling as you're writing, you're also chuckling as you're reading, because you can tell what aspects of someone's personality came up with that stuff.
Yeah. It's fun to do. I sure enjoy it. I kind of have found it to be real creative as far as making shit up goes. I found that's been a real creative outlet. I've done artwork for decades and decades, sculptures, oil paintings, watercolors, all sorts of things like that. But the writing creativity has certainly been the most entertaining. I'm literally giggling as I'm typing shit up because it's just so outrageous, but still believable.
Yeah. Yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah, I know my one buddy, he wrote one years and years ago, and as I was reading that book, I was just laughing just because I know how screwed up mentally he is anyway. And, it's just funny just reading because I'm like, yep, that's him, same with the other friend I was telling you about. And yeah, no, that's good times though. At least you find ways to stay creative and busy during all this spare time that you have during this thing called retirement.
Well, during the not the falconry season, the rest of the time, it goes by fairly slowly.
Yeah, I bet. But, well, I mean, if nothing else, like I said, it's something else that you can do with your time, and sometimes things are better if they're kind of savored and go a little bit slower, with things like that. But yeah, the only other thing I wanted to ask you before we kind of start to wrap up here is that I wanted to ask you about Vizslas, because I know that was a whole chapter and kind of a big thing that you covered in Imprint Accipiter 2 and stuff also. And, I know that you've got one in the back room hanging out, and I'm just,
too.
Yeah. Well, is that still kind of your go-to breed, obviously, or is it, have you tried anything ever like in the last handful of years that's a little bit different?
Actually, my first bird dog was a Vizsla, and I've kind of stuck with him ever since. I'm not making any claims they're better than anything else. They're adequate. They work with my birds pretty good. Mm-hmm. I certainly didn't initiate the Vizsla in falconry. Far as I know, Bill Murphy in California was the first guy to really advocate for him a lot. And he bred dogs for many, many years. When I first decided I wanted to go down the whole bird dog avenue, a buddy of mine said, stay away from a lot of the established breeds, because you got a whole lot of Bubba and Theo throwing their dogs together in the backyard and, we'll make puppies. And the more uncommon breeds, they're probably a lot more careful about breeding what male to what female for what desirable traits. And they're doing things intentionally rather than out of convenience. And I ended up picking Vizsla out of a magazine in the back of Gun Dog magazine. Got my puppy in from North Dakota and have kind of been running them dogs ever since.
Yeah, and as you know, I have a couple as well, and I think if I had it to do over again for where we're at and for what I'm doing, hindsight's always 2020. Of course, I don't regret getting because I love the breed as well. I mean, it's they can be a little much at times, but at the same time, it's hard to beat the house, the household aspect of them, I think. And we had more feather still and bigger fields to run where I'm at, it'd probably still be my top choice. But I've also gotten dachshunds recently and kind of converted to that a little bit.
Yeah, and I've seen a guy, Tyler Slade, and he's got this little cocker or a spaniel dog. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I even went down the right road going with pointers, for all these years. Mm-hmm. The little Flushing dog seems to be just a tremendous advantage. Mm.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to ask you, because I didn't know if it's just still to this day just your favorite breed because of just that's what your experience is, or if there's anything that you wish you would have gotten into differently. Or
no, the little spaniels sure are intriguing. But these dogs should last me until I'm done with falconry, until I'm just too old to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's cool though. I mean, it's nice to have stuck with the breed for this long and have that familiarity. And I know you've had some good dogs.
Yeah. They're very versatile, pardon the pun.
Yeah.
On one day I hit a field around here and they're not going to really range much more than 200 or 300 yards. Mm-hmm. Last fall, we was up in Wyoming hunting sage grouse and they were running 3/4 of a mile. Mm-hmm. I mean, day after day after day, we're running big.
Yeah.
Maybe not as big as the setters, but 3/4 of a mile is a hell of a cast.
Yeah. And like I said, with their energy levels and their abilities, I mean, I just don't, you know how it is. I mean, like I said, hindsight 2020, whenever I got my first Vizsla, what attracted me to them was because they're one of the first breeds that were originally bred for falconry. Sure, and sure. So on and so forth. You do the reading and you know enough at that point to be dangerous and you think you're making the right decision, but you don't think about, and I've discussed this before, but you don't think about the other factors. And, knowing what I know now, it would have been would have been better to go with a smaller breed, for the fields and things that I have, because a dog that's like Vizsla size or bigger, is going to burn up a field real fast, and a lot of times your bird's not going to be in the best position depending on what you're flying and things like that. And had I taken all these different things into consideration, I maybe would have just went ahead and gone the dachshund route to begin with. But I still love my Vizslas. They're sweethearts, and sometimes they're a little over affectionate at times. But yeah, no, I was just curious if there was anything else that you thought you might try, or if it's just kind of too late in your mind to.
Oh, it's too late for me. The dogs I have now, saving some sort of tragedy, they'll last me till I'm done with falconry.
Yeah.
They're going to be, they're the right age.
Yeah. Yeah. I got you. Well, cool. Like I said, I didn't know if you had any addendums as far as the Vizsla breed goes, or if that was just kind of your general thoughts on that.
Well, they've worked out real well for me.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, they're a hard breed to beat as far as the rest of life, for sure. At least that's my humble opinion, for whatever that means, which is probably nothing. But anyway, I like them a lot too. I love them. But yeah, well, I mean, I guess, we've covered a lot of what I really wanted to cover as far as, the different aspects of the writing and, the different things like that. But before we go, I mean, I do want to get one more, really good story from you, and okay. Whatever your favorite is. I know you've got 40 years to draw from, and
Okay,
it can be hard, but
here's my favorite human training story. You write a how-to book, you're training humans.
Mhm.
You're not really training birds, you're training people to train birds.
yeah.
So I'm down in Albuquerque, New Mexico, flying quail with Tyler, and he's got that male imprint American bird that he flew, so well, and
Hash brown.
hash browns.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And of course, the bird just caught quail after quail after quail after quail. It's the end of the day. He's feet up on a kill, and I'm standing there right next to him, and he's like, his bird's like eating the quail. Its wings are down, mantling, all that stuff. And he's like, "Hey, you got any magic potions to get the bird to stop this shit?" And of course, this is like nearly springtime. It's quite well along in the season. I'm like, "Well, sure." He's like, he looked at me incredulously, and I'm like, "Stand right over there." So he takes about 4 steps away, and I'm like, "Just stand there." And the bird goes, whoop, lifted its wings up just like nothing. He's like, "Well, son of a bitch, why didn't you tell me about this before?" And I'm like, "I put it in the books. Didn't you read?"
That's hilarious. Yeah.
But that's about the best example I got of cause and effect you've ever seen in your life. That's probably my favorite human training story.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, and it is amazing sometimes, just the littlest things you don't think of,
Well, I'm watching the bird's head movements, and it's like looking at him, with that sideways head twitch thing. I would model it, but it won't show up in the pod thing, so there's no reason to do that. But I can look at the bird, and I can see that it's feeling just a little bit crowded. And all it really needs is another 5 or 6 feet away, and it'll be just fine. Mm-hmm. He moved over there. It immediately raised its wings, and so that's my favorite human training story.
Well, I'm sure that the subject of the story, is probably to do something with that also, right?
Well, I love hunting quail.
Well, I meant the human subject in that part of the story. Yeah.
Well, it's a funny story. Got a magic pill for that? I'm like, sure, of course.
That's great. Well, I know you've already told a few stories with the birds and stuff too, but what's one of the more memorable like bird / non-human stories that you have? Human training stories.
Bird / non-human training stories.
Any flights? Any particular bird that's the most memorable?
This last year, I was down in the river bottoms just chucking pigeons underneath the falcons. No big deal. There's a local vet, Tim Sullivan. He was tagging along that day. And bird stoops down, catches a pigeon, and starting to pluck and eat on it. And I'm like, I kind of got to give it a little bit of space, a little bit of time I can make in, but I need a few more minutes before I do it. Otherwise, she's going to pack it off. It's a female peregrine, and the bird squats down real flat and bolts with the bird. Just about that quick. And here comes a male bald eagle, boop, 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 right overhead. Chase that falcon about a half a mile to 3/4 of a mile out. They turn 90 degrees. The eagle gets over the top of the bird, dives down, grabs the pigeon rather than the falcon. Unfortunately, the peregrine's foot is between the eagle's foot and the pigeon.
Oh, man.
So the eagle is flying 90 degrees to us away, dragging the peregrine backwards by 1 foot, which is pinned to the pigeon. And Tim's like, Mike, I think your bird's going to die. I think your bird's dead now. There's nothing we can really do about it. He's my veterinarian.
Yeah, yeah.
And we got this running dialogue going on, And then after about 200 yards, the falcon sort of like falls off the eagle, and the eagle flies away with the pigeon. The bird stands there on the ground. He's like, Mike, your bird's still alive, but it's going to die. It has no chance. So, all right. So I swing the lure, and boy, she instantly came, right in. And he's looking at it. He's like, hey, I think your bird's going to live.
Yeah.
Medical science at its best.
Right. Yeah. Do we want to go ahead and plug his practice for everybody too while we're at it? Yeah.
He's retiring. He just sold his practice. No, he's been a very good friend and a very good veterinarian for many, many decades.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's easy to forget that a lot of this stuff really isn't necessarily rocket science, and yeah, some of the most
it's gonna live, it's gonna die.
Exactly. There's a 50-50 chance your bird's gonna live or die. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's ultra scientific falconry for sure. But well, that's hilarious, man. Well, like I said, I'm glad that we could make this work though, and I appreciate you finally, taking the time to do it, or finally agreeing to do it. I know that this typically isn't, this type of thing is really not kind of your thing, but I mean, I think that a lot of people are going to enjoy, this conversation and probably get something out of it. And I appreciate, anybody that I can have conversations with, friends or just acquaintances or whatever, that are transparent, and willing to share a lot of this type of stuff, especially someone that's been doing this for a very long time.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And before we end though, I do want to get one last final piece of advice that you wouldn't mind leaving for current or future generations of falconers, and then we can go ahead and call this good probably, and go on about the rest of the day. And
okay, advice, right?
Yeah, piece of advice, any sentiment that you'd like to leave?
Yeah, be prepared. Before you get your bird, have your facility. Before you get your bird, have your equipment. Before you get your bird, have your hawk food. Plan ahead. Don't try to go through life flying by the seat of your pants. There you go. Plan ahead.
Well done, man. All right. Well, like I said, I appreciate you taking the majority of an afternoon to do this. And, it's been fun. Like I said, hopefully this was at least a little bit fun for you anyway.
Sure. Very different.
But anyway, well, like I said, hopefully we'll get a chance to actually do some hawking together at some time soon. And hopefully it won't be another, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, however long it was before I see you again.
I don't know. As long as I'm above ground, that's good.
Fair enough, man. Well, like I said, we can go ahead and call this good then, unless there's anything else that you want to share.
No, thank you.
Well, I appreciate you, Mike, and we'll talk again soon, hopefully.